So our third speaker for this session is Dr. Zackary Johnson. Dr. Johnson is an associate professor here at Duke in the Nicholas School of the Environment, located out at the Duke Marin Lab. He's a professor of biological oceanography and biotechnology. Zach works a lot with microalgae and has some really interesting work looking at marine microalgae food systems, which he'll be discussing today.
So I'm going to be talking with you about algae. Algae have that ick factor. Aren't those the things growing in my swimming pool, in my shower? Aren't these causing harmful algal blooms? Yes, they do all those things, but they have a lot of good things going for them too. And so I'm going to be talking about the good things today. Probably most of you don't think about algae in the context of food, or at least human food. I'm going to bring you up to speed on what algae are. Why we're focusing on algae as a food system, and then go through some of the unique characteristics of growing algae. It's a microbe itself, and so the things we think about are a little bit different than conventional terrestrial crops. Talk just briefly about some microbiomes associated with algae, and then finally some pilot study we've done with microalgae, how that's affecting the animals that they're fed. So let's talk a little bit about algae. So algae are many different things. They are, this is a loose definition of organisms generally, so it's not a phylogenetic definition. Algae are photosynthetic. They use light for energy. Most are single-celled, but not all, and so seaweed are algae too, but I'm going to be focusing on the single-celled ones. And so as such, most of them are considered microbes. They are incredibly genetically diverse. They occupy 2 domains of life, and so all of that genetic diversity translates into size differences. And so I have this cartoon showing you the range of different sizes they can be. Have different lifestyles, different capabilities. But for us, for food systems, that translates into the ability to grow different products. And so just like you wouldn't eat cotton or wear peanuts, different algae might be grown for different purposes. And so not all algae are the same thing. There are many, many different things out there. And so we're exploring that algae genetic diversity towards developing different products in the long run. But you may not know, but algae are actually already doing a lot of things for you. They produce roughly half of the oxygen you breathe, and so you can thank them for that. They're removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in the process. That's, of course, photosynthesis. They support essentially all marine fisheries, super important for the broader food system. And then they're also in a lot of specialized products in those long ingredient lists that you may not look at normally. And so these are things like agar, alginate, carrageenan, and so toothpaste, ice cream, and so on and so forth. And so they're in a lot of different products that we already use, and so they're just kind of hidden in there because of that ick factor. But there's reasons to think that we might need them to do a little bit more for us, and so this is what's driving our broad research enterprise towards developing marine algae in particular as a sustainable source of food. And so the big drivers of this, you've already heard from Kelly, and so this is population is increasing. And he also mentioned that it's not only that population is increasing and needs more food, but global wealth is also increasing. And so it's not just that there's more people, but the people that exist are using more resources. And so per capita, we're consuming more food, and there's just more people. And so we need more food and more healthy food to support that long-term growth. And so these are just a couple examples of that. There on the lower right-hand side is broad agricultural products, and so this is everything from food to fiber and so on. And so you can see that increasing demand over the last couple decades. An example a little bit closer to my heart is the growth in seafood consumption. And so you can see that over the last roughly 20 years, wild-caught fish has actually plateaued. So there's no more fish that we can fish out of the sea. We've done pretty much as much as we can. And so the increasing growth in seafood consumption globally is driven by aquaculture. And to continue that trend, to continue aquaculture growth, we're going to need to find new sources of food to feed the fish. So both feeding ourselves and also feeding the animals that we eat. Unfortunately, the land for agriculture is relatively fixed. This is trends over the last several decades. And so you can see that whether you're in developing or developed countries, the trends are very modest. And so basically the land that we have to grow food is static. And the arable land per capita, because the number of people, population is growing, is decreasing rapidly. And so this requires food systems that have the ability to be more productive, to grow faster, to grow more per area. So that this is a requirement for the future, and so modern agriculture has done a good job of that, but these trends are going to need to continue, and so we need to look elsewhere. Another huge challenge for conventional agriculture is that freshwater is incredibly limiting. And so this is a global map of where freshwater is stressed already, and not coincidentally, the areas in red are where it's stressed. And so not coincidentally, these areas have, many of them have political problems that's related to freshwater stress. And so that's the current world. A slightly different image, this is in the future, and so you can see that many more countries are gonna be water stressed, including our own. Remember that roughly 70% of fresh water is used for agriculture, and so we need to find crops that, that use less water. We're already using all the water out there, right? We're already using land, we're already using the water. We need to find new ways to grow crops to feed growing numbers of people. And so that's where marine algae come in to play. And so they have really strong fundamentals. They're marine, and so that means they don't use fresh water. Not using fresh water is a huge advantage. It doesn't, marine algae don't necessarily need full seawater to grow. They can use brackish water or even partly salty water. They can use recycled water or other low quality water. And so this is a huge advantage as a crop as compared to other traditional crops. They don't require arable land, and so while corn and soybeans and other traditional crops require healthy soil, marine algae don't care, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a few slides. They grow incredibly quickly, and so this gets back to one of the major drivers is we need crops that are productive and that grow faster than traditional conventional crops. And so we can harvest a crop every 2 to 3 to 4 days. And so that is just absolutely incredible. If you compare that to like corn or soybeans, you're lucky to get 2 or 3 crops a year. Every couple of days at our farm, we harvest, much to the chagrin of my team, but nevertheless, we harvest all the time, and so that actually makes it have really strong fundamentals. And then all that's well and good, but if the algae don't have things that we want, then who cares? But they do, and so like all cells, algae have major biochemical components, and so those include protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and those are valuable things. So protein, of course, yeah, and all these things are the building blocks of food and feed, and also fuel. And so depending on the algae strain that you select, they're gonna have more or less of those individual components. There's, of course, many details that go into that. The amino acid profiles, the fatty acid profiles can be different between strains. Micronutrient profiles are different. And just getting back to the example of, you know, cotton or peanuts or corn or soy, those are grown for different purposes. Different algae will be grown for different food and feed and perhaps fuel purposes as well. And so, but the building blocks are there. And so with those strong fundamentals and the fact that they have things that we want in terms of a food system makes them an exciting candidate. And so that's why we study them. And so just to kind of drive home what this could look like, we actually have a pilot scale farm that we started off of the Kona coast of Hawaii. And just to give you a sense of the dynamics here is that, so this is grown in a lava field, and so I think most of us would recognize that you can't grow wheat or corn in a lava field. The water, it's not intuitive, but the water actually comes from the ocean, yeah? And so we use that seawater to grow them. And they have, like most plants, they have relatively simple requirements, nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and a few micronutrients as well. And so this is the vision. The vision isn't to grow them in Hawaii, although that would be awesome. That's not going to work in the long run. But the concept here is that you can grow them anywhere, anywhere in the world where there's sunlight and some source of water. So this really opens up the door to be able to grow crops in areas that we may not consider for traditional agriculture. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like in practice, not just at that demonstration facility, but at our own at the Duke Marine Lab. And so this is a hybrid or multi-component system, and it's relevant for how the microbiome comes into that. Algae are a microbe themselves, and so that makes them unique in terms of a food product. But the microbiome also comes into play, and how we grow them dramatically influences that microbiome. We have, this starts off with an indoor scale-up facility. And so you can kind of think of this as like a nursery, a greenhouse, where we grow up algae at various scales on up to, those are 20-liter carboys that you see in the picture. And so they start as test tubes, and we kind of scale them up to 20 liters, and then, yeah, multiply those. And all of these are grown inside in autoclave seawater in relatively simple environments. The inoculum that we give them is, it's never azenic. That is, that the algae is there, but then they also come along with their own microbes or microbiome in the culture. And so that microbiome is relatively simple. There's only, depending on the strain, anywhere from 10 to 20 and sometimes more strains or OTUs or however, ASVs, however you want to call them, types of bacteria in a given culture. And so those communities are relatively simple. When we do experiments, things are repeatable, and it's very controllable, and that's wonderful. And so this is our indoor scale-up facility that we use to seed our outdoor operation. The outdoor operation is where things get interesting. And so this is a picture of it. This is the Duke Marine Lab, or part of the Duke Marine Lab. We're on an island in eastern North Carolina, Beaufort. And so this is an overhead of that. We have 4 scale-up ponds. These are called Raceway Ponds because they look like race car tracks, if you're a fan of NASCAR, which I'm not, but you could be. Anyway, yeah, so the race car tracks, and so the algae are basically moved around there to keep the culture homogeneous or mixed in terms of light and nutrients and other things. And so those 1,000-liter ponds then serve as the intermediary step to the 5,000-liter scale ponds. And the 5,000-liter scale ponds is where they're grown for roughly 2 to 4 days, depending on sunlight and temperature and that. The point that I want to make here is that this is, unlike the indoor facility, this is outdoors, right? And so, and if you look kind of closely often to the upper right-hand side, you can see that there's some water there. Again, we're on an island, and so that water is a supply of contaminants, microbes, and other things, birds and other crazy things get in our ponds. And so so this is analogous to other types of terrestrial farming in that, if you have a cornfield or a soybean field, anything can get into those fields. And so farmers have to spend a lot of effort to try to make sure that the bad things don't get in there, so pesticides, fungicides, and so on, fences, what have you. And so we have the same types of concerns. I bring this up is because most microbial food systems are grown in reactors inside buildings. And so that's not our vision. Our vision is open air ponds because they're very inexpensive. And the reason that we operate these this way is because because these systems are can give us insight into how larger scale systems, like I showed in Hawaii, operate and can be designed. And so we're not trying to build a small scale thing. We're trying to develop a system that ultimately can scale to solve global problems. So that's how it works, or those are the pieces. How does the system work in practice? Well, I kind of alluded to it, but just to make sure we're on the same page, that we grow up these 20-liter reactors. We then seed these smaller ponds that are roughly 1,000 liters. Those ponds provide the final inoculum to these larger scale ponds, which are roughly 5,000 liters. They're filled with that seed and then seawater and some nutrients, and they grow up in roughly 2 to 4 days. And so they look something like that. So they start off with that clean seawater, which is, nothing's really in there, and then it turns up into this green stuff. And so we're looking for an algae bloom, and that's ultimately what we're trying to harvest. And so some images of what that looks like are this, and so it's kind of a collage of what things are out there. And so I have a couple different strains on the lower left-hand side to show you, yeah, we investigate different strains because they might be better for different purposes. We harvest it with a device on the upper right-hand side, which is a filter-based device. And this is relevant and important for this discussion because when we think about harvesting crops, this is true for terrestrial crops to some extent, but really true for microalgae is that when we harvest algae, which is roughly 5 to 10 microns in size, we get a whole lot of other stuff along with that too. We get a ton of different types of bacteria, and other weird things that get into our ponds as well. And so it's not, by no means is this a pure product. It's not just one corn kernel or one soybean, that there are algae in there, but then there's lots of microbes in there. And so those microbiomes are complex, and that comes along with the product. And so that makes it, somewhat more analogous to like a fermented dairy product, like, yogurt or something like that, in that this is a complex microbial mixture of desired product and then other things that are in there. And so we don't fully understand how that works yet, but this is both an opportunity and a challenge, and I'll get to that in a second. So that algae turns into a paste that's roughly analogous to like a toothpaste, and sometimes we'll use that paste, and other times it'll be freeze-dried into a powder, which is in the lower right-hand corner. Anyway, so we grow up, so that's on the production side, and so it has parallels with traditional terrestrial-based agriculture, but there are some unique properties in that, in particular, that the microbes and the microbiome that are associated with this product can be complex and come along with the product. There's no way to get rid of them. And so what I'm showing here are a couple different profiles of microbiomes associated with different stages in the runs of these ponds. And so the different colors are different families of bacteria that we've assessed using 16S ribosomal RNA genes and standard technique. And so the carboys, it might be a little bit hard to read, but the carboys are those sort of clean cultures. And then you can also see there's a seawater one in there, which is relatively, lots of different things come in with the seawater. The seawater is not sterile, just like soil. It brings stuff along. You can see little ponds in there. You can see a larger pond in there. And so the point here is that depending on where you are in the stage of growth, even though this happens over the course of just a few days or maybe a couple weeks for the entire process, there can be dramatic changes or differences in the overall microbiome associated with the algae growth. Even within a few-day pond run, you see an evolution of that microbiome community. And so if you look at the pond run B in those last 4 bars, you can see that things are changing even over the course of 4 days. That's interesting. What are the broader patterns of that? And so this is looking at roughly 100 runs of pond production, and so each one of those dots represents a community, and so dots that are closer together have microbiome communities that are more similar to each other, and dots that are further apart are more different, and so you can kind of see it's a scatter shot there. Different colors represent different stages in the growth of our process, and so the point that I want to make here is that there's a lot of variability in the microbiome of these algae ponds. This is analogous to the discussion that we heard just before on crop, that if we go to different soil types in North Carolina, you're going to find different microbiomes. Same thing here with our algae growth, and so it's incredibly variable. And so, yeah, you might say, I don't care about that. Who cares? But we care a lot. So these are three different runs of algae that we've grown, and these are all the same algae. So you can see that they look really different visually. The one on the left is very green, the one in the middle somewhere in between, and the one on the right a little bit more pale. You can see just in terms of the texture of the product, this has been freeze-dried, but you can tell that it's different. And so it's the same algae grown in the same system, only differed by the three runs were all done within the same week, so the environmental conditions were all the same. And so our only explanation is that the microbiomes are different for these different runs. And so they're really important for the development of this product. We don't understand, we have not advanced to the level of traditional terrestrial crops, how microbiomes are affecting the community. We know they are, but we don't have a mechanistic approach yet. But we think this is a huge opportunity to try to tune the product one way or another, or at least understand what's going on. So the final thing that I wanted to mention is that, so this algae and the microbiome that comes along with it, we've tested this as a food product, well, actually a feed product, with a variety of animals, with partners. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit, just a couple examples, results of that with chicks. We've also done this with shrimp and salmon and some other animals as well. And so the results are generally comparable across these different systems. But I have the chick results, so I'm going to talk about that today. So we've tested microalgae, not so much as a replacement for food, but try to make the animal potentially more healthy or grow faster. Does it improve performance of the chicks? And so that was the test. And so the results I'm going to show you today are on growth and feed conversion, and then just generally gut health. Turns out chickens have a lot of gastrointestinal distress. Not surprising, because they're grown in somewhat horrific conditions at the commercial scale, but it's very efficient. And anyway, so we're going to take a look at that. And so there, if you look at growth, they're paired. There's a lot of details in here, and I don't want to get too much into them for this audience, but if we just look at control versus algae where the fat has been removed, and then full strength algae, so the whole algae, you can see that, that if you give chicks just 5% of their diet as algae, they actually grow better. And so if you're a farmer, that's a big deal, right? And so giving chicks a microbe, and that is algae, and its associated microbiome, helps them grow. And so as a farmer, that's a really big deal. And so that's exciting to us. Good news. It doesn't, so they're going to grow faster, and so that potentially makes you more profitable or what have you. It doesn't really seem to affect their feed conversion, and so that's also good news, is that you don't have to feed them more to get the same amount of biomass. So if I give them 1 kilo of food, I'm going to get the same amount of chicken out. And if anything, it's actually becoming more efficient, but it certainly doesn't harm it. And so that's also good news. And so this is something that farmers worry about a lot. And then finally, we did a little bit on the gut health, and these results are a little bit complicated and confusing and a work in progress. There's actually chick studies going on right now to unpack this. But I just point you to the middle result. Interestingly, there was really no difference in the controls and the full algae, but when we start looking at defatted algae, or algae that's been not ultra-processed, but semi-processed, it turns out that, that when you induce gut distress, if you give them algae, that actually helps them a little bit, at least statistically. So it's not a huge effect, but it looks like it's heading in the right direction, and so it's certainly worth exploring. And so the point here is that perhaps, like we'll hear later in today, that what you eat actually affects your health, and so that's true for in the algae space, the associated microbiome, and then how it translates into the health of the chicks in this case. We've also seen this for salmon, salmon gut health, and some other animals as well. And so just to kind of wrap this up, a little bit adjacent to some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, but microalgae, it is a microbe, and it also has a microbiome associated with it, and it's a potentially really exciting food source, a perhaps unique food system. That microbiome is associated with the algae is incredibly variable, and hopefully that image of how different the products are helps you understand why we worry about the microbiome so much, not just the algae, but its associated microbiome. It affects that product. And then finally, it affects the health. And so these algae help the chicks grow a little bit faster, and it looks like there may be some effects on the gut health, certainly worth investigating a little bit more. I think there's, in the broader context, this is a unique system because it grows so fast, because it doesn't use fresh water, because it doesn't use that arable land. I think there's really huge opportunities to look at this system in terms of food security and overall health, and then thinking about its associated microbiome. Can we use that microbiome to understand changes in productivity, potentially enhancing that? Certainly consistency. As a producer, you want to be consistent. And then finally, thinking about it in terms of product efficacy. We want to have food that not just fills our belly, but also that makes us healthy or improves performance. And so we want to think about not just the algae per se, but also the associated microbiome as part of that continuum.